absurd. There's God right in the clouds, Santa in the sky, white dude, all the biblical characters in the Bible, children's books, white people, even though they were in a part of the world where there are no white people, right? So even though we don't have that in our home, my child has nonetheless already at the age of 7 somehow internalized the idea that the creation source of the universe, whether taken in religious terms or humanistic and more naturalistic terms, is somehow closer to her than to Morgan Freeman. And if my daughter has internalized that, what do you think black and brown children internalize when they see the same imagery? And they see those images. They see them in the stained glass of our churches. You see them in the Christmas cards that get sent around every holiday season where baby Jesus is in the manger in what apparently is Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, rather than the other Bethlehem. Right? Lily white Jesus, which makes no sense anthropologically, biologically, historically, makes no sense at all. But our children see those images and it can affect them. Now, if you were to try to break into my house and hurt my children, I would kill you without hesitation. I don't even have a gun, but I would find something and I would throw it at you and you would die. Like, it's just that simple. I would make sure that you died, right? If you were to try to hurt my kids. I'm not saying that because I'm a badass. I'm just saying, like, I'm just letting you know, like, don't mess with my children. But the problem, right? The problem is that there is something coming into that house. And it is hurting my children, and it's hurting all of our children, and it's hurting us, and I didn't even know it was there. See, the doors are locked at night, the windows are shut, the alarm is on, and whatever this thing is doesn't know the code, but the dirty little secret is it doesn't need to. It weasels its way into our children's brains and affects them. That's how I know that we've all ingested this poison, and we better own that if we're gonna have an honest dialogue. It's not about feeling guilty about it. In fact, that's the beauty of it, right? If we've all been subjected to it, there's no reason to feel guilty because we could not have helped but ingest it. The question is, what do we do now? How do we take responsibility, which is not the same as guilt? Responsibility is what you take because of the kind of person you are. Guilt is what you feel for the stuff you've actually done.
When we talk about internalized racism, we often refer to marginalized racial groups absorbing negative stereotypes about themselves. But I happened to come across a video of a professor by the name Tim Wise explaining and educating people how white people can also internalize racism and acknowledging the history of the United States of America and what has been happening. He even went on ahead and gave a few examples of how white privilege actually do work. And I found this video quite interesting to share with you guys. And the reason is because in most cases, especially when you go through social media and black people are trying to tell white people how they actually are privileged, and you see most people commenting or stitching videos and say that there is nothing as white privilege. But on this episode, it's actually coming from one of their own and giving examples from a personal experience. I want us to watch these videos together, guys. This video is just for education purposes only. Kindly consider subscribing to this channel if you haven't. Every clip that you'll be seeing on our today's episode, credits belongs to the original creators of these videos that you're seeing on your screens. So let's just dive right ahead and we'll come back with more commentary. I'd really love to know what your thoughts or what your take is on these, especially if you're a white American who been benefiting from white privilege. Tell us down on the comment section how you've been benefiting from these. And also, if you're a white American who believe that white privilege doesn't exist, tell us on the comment section and explain to us why. So let's just have a conversation on our comment section. So let's just dive right ahead and we'll come back with more commentary.
And those are two different things. We take responsibility for things even when we're not to blame for them. So that's the first piece. The second piece, the systemic piece, right? Our inability or our lack of willingness to admit that there's also a systemic element to racism, that it's not just about personal prejudice. If it were, it'd be so much easier, right? Because we could just educate people out of their biases, right? And we could somehow undo their personal stuff and everything would be fine. But there's a bigger problem, and it's systemic. It's the way that policies and practices and everyday procedures reinforce inequality between different racial groups, even if there's no overt bigotry in the room. What do I mean by that? Let me tell you a story to make that point. And it's a story about my own life. I am from the South. I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. I've lived in the South all my life, 10 years in New Orleans, the rest of it in Nashville. 5 months in Houston, but we don't talk about that. No offense to Houston, I'm just saying, like there are reasons and we will not discuss them. So growing up in Nashville, I went to school in public schools at a time when they had really just become truly integrated. That may seem sort of hard to believe because theoretically, right, the Supreme Court outlawed segregation back in 1954, but as was the case in Nashville, so too was it the case all throughout the South, that very few school systems actually moved toward real desegregation for about 20 years. So it was 1974, the year that I started first grade, that the school system in Nashville was actually truly integrated all the way down to the first grade level. And so by 1979-80, my fifth grade year, right, there were a lot of teachers in that system that had been in there for a really long time. Like they had been teaching since the days of segregation, and they were the kind of people that really preferred the days of segregation, right? So they didn't like having to teach black kids now, but what they really didn't like was having to teach white kids who hung out with black kids. And that was me. See, I told you before, most of the time when we say we have black friends, we're lying. In my case, I pretty much didn't have anything but black friends for the first several years of school because I went to preschool at a historically black college when I was 3 years old. Tennessee State University early childhood ed program. So most of my peers were black kids. So when I got into public school, that's who I was hanging out with. That's who I played ball with. That's who I played on the playground with. That's who I sat in the cafeteria with. And there were teachers who not only didn't like the black kids, but really didn't like me, particularly because of my affinities, both culturally, linguistically, and artistically with black folks. These are the early days of hip hop, and I was that kid. Like I was the white kid that hung out with, we would have like rap battles, and I'm not gonna do that shit now because it would be tragic. But in those days, like 79, 80, you could be really bad at that in Nashville and you were still the best on the block, right? Because it was Nashville, it wasn't Brooklyn, it wasn't the Bronx, right? So the teachers really had a problem with who I hung out with and the music that I listened to and who my friends were. And there was one particular teacher, Mrs. Crownover, who was most offended by it. And so one day I get a report card, I have a D- in a reading class, which was what she taught, right? And my mom freaked out because reading was like the one thing I could do, right? If it was a math class, she would have totally not even blinked. She'd have been like, well, at least you didn't fail, you know? Good for you, you got it up from the F last time, you know? But in this particular case, I'd been reading since I was like 2.5, right? So she sort of freaks out, she schedules a parent-teacher conference, she goes to talk to Ms. Crownover, and within about 30, 45 seconds, she realizes that grade had nothing to do with my actual effort, let alone my attitude, let alone my ability to read. It had to do with my social circle because Ms. Crownover looks at my mom within the first minute of the meeting and says, any white parent that would send their kids to public school in this day and age, meaning an integrated day and age, obviously isn't fit to be a parent, they've lost their mind. This, by the way, is not what you want to say to my mother. So within a day or two, she organized with some other parents, and within 2 or 3 or 4 days, she had very directly and unceremoniously made sure that Mrs. Crownover was relieved of her income and her professional duties from there on out. She was forced into early retirement, as she should have been. So good for my mom. On the one hand, that's great. We got rid of the bigot. But remember, I told you it wasn't about individual bigots. It was about systems. And so here's the problem. Even as my mother took action, as she should have, to remove this racist from the classroom where she had no business teaching, right? But the problem was that after Miss Crownover was gone, I went back into a school system that every day, in a very subtle but pernicious way, was sending the same kind of message that Mrs. Crownover was trying to send, which is white students are better, black students are lesser, and they shouldn't be together. How was the system sending that message? Very easy. By putting almost all the white kids in the honors and the advanced level classes, no matter what kind of students we were. I was a lousy student. I wasn't a good student till like last week. I literally got my shit together like Tuesday of last week, right? I wasn't a good student, but I was always in the honors track. And the black kids, no matter how bright they were almost always in the standard or the remedial level track and never moved up no matter how well they did. So the system was sending a message by dividing us and saying that it was division based on ability, but it wasn't. They were sending the message that Crownover was sending. They didn't even need her there to send it, you see. And my mother never saw that. And I never saw that. It went right over our heads. And that's not just a 1979 story. That continues to happen today. Right now in this country, students of color are half as likely to be placed in advanced placement and honors classes compared to white students. Students of color are half as likely to be taught by the most experienced teachers. White students twice as likely to have the most experienced teachers. Right? Black and Latino students 2, 3, even 4 times more likely to be suspended or expelled, even though they do not break the rules more often than white students. That's the belief, but it's not true. There have been 14 different studies. They all find the same thing, that the rates of serious school rule infractions are virtually identical across racial lines. People bringing drugs to campus, equally across racial lines. People bringing weapons to campus, actually white men more likely to bring guns and knives to campus in K-12 schools than black men or Latino men. Contrary to popular belief, but that's what the Centers for Disease Control research says. But who is it that's getting caught? It's black kids and Latino kids. They're the ones getting searched. They're the ones getting detected. They're the ones getting suspended and often prosecuted, whereas white students are doing the same thing, doing drugs just as much, bringing weapons just as often, if not more so, and escaping notice. So that's still happening. That's a system, and it doesn't require one overt racist in the classroom for that to continue, right? So that becomes a problem. We have to do more than just look at the individual. We have to look at the way that structures operate, sometimes without us even realizing it's happening. Because if we don't do that, we can get rid of every individual bigoted cop or every individual bigoted teacher or any individual bigoted employer. We can sue them, I guess, in court, and maybe people can even win those lawsuits, but what does that really change unless we take aim at those institutional policies that keep recreating inequality? The third piece, our unwillingness to see how history affects the present, how the past and the present mix. We really don't like this. We really don't want to talk about this. And when I say we, I mean those of us called white especially. There are people of color who don't necessarily always want to engage it either, but especially those of us called white. We'll say things like this when people of color bring up racism. We'll say, well, why can't you just get over it? You know, all of that slavery stuff was a long time ago. In fact, Louis C.K. has this really funny bit, right, where he jokes about how white people have just moved the date of slavery further and further and further back. Like it used to be, slavery was 100 years ago, because it was. And then it was, slavery was 125 years ago, because it was. And now it should be, slavery was 150 years ago, but we'll actually say things like, that was hundreds and hundreds, that was like 1,000 years ago, where we've not had slavery for 500 years. When in fact it's very much within the lifetime of people in this room's great-great-grandparents, even sometimes great-grandparents. And in fact, de facto slavery extended well past the Emancipation Proclamation. There were people of color being sent back into virtual enslavement all throughout the first 30 years of the 20th century, being made to work in the mines in places like Birmingham, coal mines there and elsewhere, going back to the very plantations from which their grandparents and great-grandparents had been emancipated, as sharecroppers, as tenant labor, tenant farmers, right? So in fact, slavery isn't that long ago. Segregation certainly isn't that long ago. But here's the point. We don't want to talk about it. And this is really funny that we want to tell black and brown folks to get over the past, because frankly, those of us who are white, we love the past. Absolutely flippin' love the past. How do I know that? Because some of us clearly want to go back to it. How do I know that? Because the Tea Party was a thing. And during that period when the Tea Party was a thing, you had a bunch of white folks go into rallies dressed in Revolutionary War costumes, carrying muskets and wearing powdered wigs. Okay, here's the thing. If you dress up in a Revolutionary War costume with a musket and a powdered wig, calling yourself the Tea Party, which I think is a really old-ass reference, you were in no position to lecture black people about getting over the past. That's all, right? Because by definition, you're still rocking like 1774. You got me? Right? But even now, right, we say things like, what is July 4th other than a reference to the past? Like, why do we still celebrate that? Independence Day. We broke away from the British a long-ass time ago. That didn't happen last Friday. So why do we still set off fireworks every July 4th, right? I dare you to go up next Independence Day to like the most patriotic guy on the route, you know, with the red, white, and blue wardrobe, because that's an awesome wardrobe palette, and like a big I Heart the USA button on his hat, like flying a flag, blaring Lee Greenwood from the back of a pickup truck. I dare you to go up to that guy, tap him on the shoulder, and say, yeah, this is all really nice, this is great, but when are you going to get over it? Hope you have running shoes on, because he's going to chase you. Although he'll probably have had enough, you know, slices of mom's apple pie that he won't be able to catch you. But my point being, we love the past as long as it makes us feel good about ourselves, right? When a current presidential candidate says he wants to make America great again, it's a reference to the past, right? It's a reference that says we want to go back to when things were great, but only great for certain people, because the time that's being remembered so fondly wasn't so great for everyone. right? So we love the past as long as it venerates us. We just don't want to deal with the ugly, but that's not how history works. You got to deal with the good and the bad and everything in between, right? And we know that, don't we? Like on a personal level, we know, like, put aside politics and race, just like you as individuals, right? We all come from families that are jacked up in one way or another, right? We all have dysfunction. We all have really messed up stuff in our families, some of which we talk about, a lot of which we never talk about, right? And the fact is, if you ever want, just as an individual, to move past your past, you have to confront it. Whether that's on a therapist's couch or whether that's with friends or a lover or a spouse or a partner, whatever it is, you've got to be willing to confront where you come from in order to get to the next place that's better. But we don't want to do that. We don't do that as individuals, and it eats us up. And we don't do that as a country, but we have to do that because the past affects the present. Inertia isn't just a property of the physical universe. It's also a property of the political and the economic universe. And here's how I know it's so important. Again, a story involving my own children, about why it's so important that we know our history and are able to articulate that and the dangers of not knowing it.
Yeah, guys, you've seen the video and I'm sure that you've learned a thing or two. And if you haven't, please go back and listen to his message and what he's saying, because I believe it's very educative, especially if you're a white American who believe that white privilege doesn't exist, or, racism and slavery is a thing of the past. Tim Wise goes on ahead and explains how so many people from his community are unwilling to learn their history or face their history. He even goes on ahead and explains to us that there is no way that you can move forward as a country without facing your past. Even telling people that you should stop telling Black Americans that slavery is a thing of the past. Instead, it's good for us to face our history, to get to learn from it, because it's quite dangerous of not learning and understanding the past history of the United States of America. And as to what we are seeing happening today is the effect of the history or the past. And the past is what has shaped America to what it is today. Now, after watching and listening to him, I now understand how sometimes I see on the comments section people saying or thanking white people for coming out and speaking against racism, white privilege, and systematic racism. Because I'm like, why are you giving these people credit for talking on the things that are happening? But you've listened to him and heard him say that in school, teachers would treat him bad just because he's hanging out with Black kids. And those are the kids that he grew up, hanging up around with, the kids that he went to school with. But teachers were actually adults who were treating him bad just because he was hanging out with Black kids. And this is the same case where I see white people being cancelled by their community just because of coming and talking the truth, which is still happening today when they're asking their people to, face or challenge racism and systematic racism. You'll have their community against them, including their families against them, just because they're discussing or talking on issues or trying to educate their community on the issues that is affecting Black Americans and their past history, because most of them don't like learning or hearing about the past that actually doesn't favor their story. They only love hearing or celebrating the past that actually makes them happy or makes them look good. He goes on ahead and gives us an example of white privilege, of how white kids would get better treatment no matter their behaviors, always got honor classes despite their behaviors, and Black kids or other kids from other marginalized groups getting the least no matter how much they've done well or passed. So that is one example of white privilege. Well, there are so many others that are actually out here, even at our workplaces, even when it comes to the system that we actually do have today. And this is why you're seeing so many people are suffering. So many people went on ahead and voted against their own self-best interest because they thought or believed that white privilege will always save them. But right now, they're actually understanding that they cannot afford racism anymore because it's getting quite costly, and most of them actually feeling the heat. It was okay to them because in the past they could afford it. But right now, with the policies and what they've been building over the years, it's finally catching up with them, and it's getting quite expensive. And so many of them are in disbelief because they believed in the American dream. They believed in making America great, but there is no way that you can make a country great. There is no way you can make America great again without facing its past. That is the beginning of making America great again. And if America wants to move forward, they first have to face their past, accept whatever happened in the past, and stop telling Black people that slavery was a thing of the past and you should get over it. Because it's quite important for us to understand our history, and if we don't, we'll get ourselves repeating the same thing that happened in the past, which is kind of what we are seeing is happening with all the things that are actually unfolding right now in the United States of America. So you would maybe want to understand like internalized racism when it comes to white people. There are like internalized superiority where white people consciously or unconsciously believe that white culture, values, or ways of living are the default, normal, or better, assuming whiteness equals intelligence, professionalism, or safety, which is quite dangerous in our society. And this is what has been shaping what the United States of America is today. And this is why so many of you are feeling the heat, because this is what you've all been building, and you've chose not to look or study or get to learn about your history because it makes you quite uncomfortable. And if you want to make America great again, the only way to start of making America great is just face the past, get to understand your history, and get to do what's right. Another one is centering whiteness, expecting white perspective to be prioritized in conversations about race, seeing racial issues mainly through how it affects them rather than marginalized groups. But hatred and racism is affecting how America is today. Whatever is happening right now, all these policies, all these things that this new administration has come up with, it's not something that just came up. These are things that have been there, and now you're feeling the heat because this is actually what you've been building for yourselves. Another one is entitlement and privilege, believing white people are more deserving of opportunity, spaces, or leadership positions. Just like what happened with, DEI, and people were explaining, like, why are Black people getting these jobs? People believe that Black people are actually getting some of the opportunities because of their skin color, not even bothering to get to understand that Black people have also gone to school and they can, do better as white people can do. It's not just because of their skin color. And this is also another thing that is actually affecting and messing the United States of America and our today's society. You're thinking you're better than people of other color. Also feeling threatened when marginalized groups seek equality, mistaking equality for loss. I came across a video that I actually did on this channel, and a white man was actually explaining as to why they voted for this new administration. And, the fear of becoming minority and the fear of treating other people equal as, they get treated, because to them it feels like a loss. It's so crazy, guys. Instead of them feeling like equality and just being a normal human being, they feel that treating people equal and respecting human rights of other races is a loss to them. And this is why, if you've been asking yourself, why did these people vote for this new administration despite all the policies, despite what they're actually going through right now? So many of them are not yet regretting or, seeing any problem with what's happening. It's because of their fear of becoming minority and always feeling threatened because they feel like they're losing something. Another one is racial fragility, reacting defensively when racism is brought up, and some will come with an excuse like, it's not all white people, or I don't see color. You see, they always find a way of defending yourself, and you will find yourself in such a position as a white person. Just know that there is a problem and you need to face your problem and you need to sit back and think about it. avoiding accountability by centering guilt, shame, or discomfort, where we've seen in most cases people doing it, especially the Karens. Internalized fear of other races, accepting stereotypes that people of Ghana are dangerous, lazy, or less capable. You were told that illegal immigrants are criminals and they're the ones that are actually affecting your country, and whatever is happening in your country is because of illegal immigrants, and millions of you went on ahead and voted for this new regime that is causing everything that is happening. So many of you would also want to come and call people lazy. Well, right now they are asking for people to go and work in these fields, but there is no one to go and work in those fields. Then who is the lazy one here? There are some of the things that you just have to see and ask yourself questions. When you told something about certain group of people, ask yourself, why are they telling me this? Like, what is it that they did that made them term them dangerous or lazy or incapable? Because these are stereotypes that most people often believe in, which is quite dangerous. So how is all this that has been happening over the years shows up in our today's world? Feeling entitled to lead or be heard in diverse spaces. Believing diversity means adding people of color to white spaces, not restructuring power, just like so many of you are happy when they roll back on DEI. Viewing non-white cultures as exotic, different, or less advanced. Responding defensively when racism is discussed instead of reflecting. So if you happen to find yourself in any of that situation or with this mentality, you have to sit and ask yourself why. I would really love to know what your take or what your thoughts are on our today's episode. Let me know what you think about the professor message that he was trying to, educate people, and grateful to such people that come out and, be like, yeah, this is something that we have to talk about it, because we have to face our past, because if we don't, then we are on the verge of going back where we were like centuries ago. Thank you so much for watching up to this part. Kindly consider subscribing to this channel if you haven't, and until the next episode, bye.